In 1924, the Soviet Union stood at a crossroads. Its revolutionary leader, Vladimir Lenin, was dead. His body, preserved for public display, became a symbol of a nation plunged into uncertainty. The future of the world's first communist state hung in the balance, resting in the hands of the men he left behind. A power vacuum had opened at the very heart of the Kremlin, and a quiet, unassuming figure was waiting in the shadows to fill it. His name was Joseph Stalin. Lenin's death triggered a silent but brutal struggle for succession. The Communist Party, the monolithic institution that governed the vast Soviet territory, became an arena for ambition and ideology. At Lenin's funeral, thousands mourned, unaware that behind the solemn facade, political maneuvering had already begun. Key figures of the revolution, men who had stood beside Lenin, now vied for his mantle. In the grand halls of the Soviet Congress, speeches were made and alliances were forged. But the real battle was fought behind closed doors, in the corridors of power and over stacks of official documents. While others debated grand theories of global revolution, Stalin focused on the mechanics of control. He understood that true power lay not in speeches but in the dull, day-to-day administration of the state. Stalin's rise began long before Lenin's final breath. In 1922, he was appointed to the seemingly bureaucratic post of General Secretary of the Communist Party. It was a position others dismissed as administrative drudgery, but Stalin saw its potential. From his desk, he controlled the flow of information, party appointments, and internal communications. He was the gatekeeper. Every document, every promotion, every regional directive passed through his office. With methodical precision, he placed his loyalists in key positions across the country, building a network of support that was invisible to his rivals. While they commanded armies and addressed crowds, Stalin commanded the party apparatus itself. He was building the foundations of his power, one signature, one stamp, one personnel file at a time. This administrative machine would become his ultimate weapon. His chief rival was Leon Trotsky, a brilliant orator, the architect of the Red Army, and a fervent believer in permanent revolution, the idea that communism must spread globally to survive. Trotsky was charismatic, intellectual, and internationally known. He represented the fiery, idealistic spirit of the early revolution. Stalin, in stark contrast, was pragmatic and calculating. He championed the doctrine of socialism in one country, arguing that the Soviet Union should first focus on building its own industrial and military strength before exporting revolution. This ideological clash defined the post-Lenin era. In party meetings, their differences played out intense debates. Trotsky, with his grand vision, underestimated Stalin's quiet, relentless accumulation of bureaucratic power. He saw Stalin as a gray blur, a mediocre administrator, failing to recognize the iron will hidden behind the mundane facade. The battle for control was swift and decisive. By 1925, using his control over the party, Stalin had successfully isolated Trotsky, portraying him as a factionalist who threatened party unity. Trotsky was removed from his post as Commissar for Military and Naval Affairs. The man who had built the Red Army was now powerless. By 1927, he was expelled from the Communist Party altogether. The final blow came in 1929, when he was exiled from the Soviet Union. Maps were redrawn in the minds of the people, showing a world where Trotsky was no longer a hero, but a traitor. His office chair stood empty, a symbol of his political demise. Sealed documents and closed-door votes confirmed his fate. Stalin had surgically removed his greatest opponent without firing a single shot, using the party structure as a scalpel. With Trotsky gone, no one was left to challenge him. With his rivals eliminated, Stalin launched his vision for a radical transformation of the Soviet Union. He initiated the first five-year plan, a monumental program of forced industrialization. The goal was to turn a backward agrarian nation into a modern industrial superpower. In a single decade, from the smokestacks of new factories to the silhouettes of workers, against the fiery glow of furnaces, the country was mobilized. Steel, coal, and iron became the new gods. The state demanded immense sacrifice, pushing the population to its limits in the name of progress. Propaganda posters glorified the worker and the machine, promising a socialist utopia built on the foundations of heavy industry. This was not just an economic policy, it was a war against backwardness, and Stalin was its supreme commander. But this rapid industrialization came at a terrible human cost. To fund the factories, the state implemented forced collectivization of agriculture. Peasants were stripped of their land and forced onto state-run farms. The policy was met with widespread resistance, which was brutally suppressed. The result was catastrophic. Famine swept through Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other grain-producing regions, a man-made disaster that claimed millions of lives. Fields lay empty, not from drought, but from state policy. As hunger spread, so did repression. The secret police, the NKVD, cast a long shadow over the land. Barbed wire fences enclosed not just political prisoners, but entire communities that resisted the state's will. The dream of an industrial paradise was built upon a foundation of starvation and fear. By the mid-1930s, Stalin's paranoia and thirst for absolute power culminated in the Great Purge. No one was safe. Former allies turned to enemies overnight. Old Bolsheviks, heroes of the 1917 revolution, were arrested, subjected to show trials in shadowy courtrooms, and accused of being spies and saboteurs. Dark hallways in prisons like the Lubyanka echoed with confessions extracted under duress. Propaganda posters that once celebrated unity now demanded vigilance against hidden enemies of the people. The purges decimated the ranks of the Communist Party, the military leadership, and the intelligentsia. It was a reign of terror designed to eliminate any potential opposition, real or imagined, and to ensure that Stalin's authority was absolute and unquestionable. By the late 1930s, Stalin had achieved total control. From the Kremlin's imposing walls, he ruled as an autocrat with power far exceeding that of the Tsars he had helped overthrow. His portrait was everywhere, a symbol of his omnipresence. Red flags waving over Moscow were not just symbols of communism, but of his personal dominion. The party, the state, and the people were all instruments of his will. He had transformed the Soviet Union, but he had also enslaved it, creating a totalitarian state held together by a pervasive cult of personality and the constant threat of state-sponsored terror. The revolution had devoured its own children, leaving one man standing alone at the top. When World War II began, Stalin's brutal purges had left the Red Army dangerously weakened. Yet, when Germany invaded in 1941, the industrial base he had built through such cruel methods proved critical. The Soviet Union absorbed the initial shock and, at an unimaginable cost of life, eventually pushed the Nazi war machine back to Berlin. Silhouettes of tanks on the horizon and images of burning cities became the defining visuals of a global conflict that would reshape the world. Stalin, the ruthless tyrant, became an unlikely ally to the Western democracies, and the Soviet Union emerged from the war as a global superpower. After the war, Stalin's control grew even tighter. An iron curtain descended across Europe as he installed loyal communist regimes throughout the Eastern Bloc. The Cold War began, a new ideological struggle that pitted the Soviet Union against the United States. Soviet banners flew from Berlin to the Balkans, marking the expansion of his empire. The paranoia that drove the purges now fueled a global confrontation, defined by nuclear arms races and political tension. Stalin's grip on power remained absolute until his death in 1953. The legacy of Joseph Stalin is one of profound and brutal contradictions. He transformed a peasant society into an industrial and military giant capable of defeating Nazism and challenging America. But he did so through unimaginable cruelty, responsible for the deaths of millions through famine, forced labor, and political purges. His path to power was a masterclass in political strategy, manipulation, and utter ruthlessness. From a minor bureaucratic post, he ascended to become one of the most powerful and feared dictators in human history. This was how Joseph Stalin took power, and how he remade a nation and the world in his own terrifying image.